on the frozen outskirts of the Eastern Front. In January 1940, the temperature dropped below minus 40 degrees Celsius. Snow swallowed the pine forests of Kala, Finland, turning roads into white scars and villages into silent ruins. It was here, during the Winter War, that a quiet Finnish farmer-turned-soldier prepared for another day of fighting an enemy that outnumbered his army nearly 4-1. His name was Simo Häyhä, a corporal in the Finnish Army's 6th Company, Infantry Regiment 34. He stood barely over 5 feet tall, bundled in layers of white camouflage, his breath crystallizing the air in front of him. His hands were already frostbitten, stiff and cracked, barely responsive inside his gloves. Among some younger soldiers, there were whispers, doubts. How could a man with frozen fingers possibly shoot straight? The Soviet Red Army was advancing again. Thousands of troops pushed through the forest with artillery, tanks, and snipers of their own. Their orders were simple: break the Finnish line at Kala and open the road west. For the Finns, retreat was not an option. If Kala fell, the front would collapse. That morning, Simo crawled into position alone, packing snow around his rifle to steady it, pressing ice into his mouth to hide his breath from enemy scopes. He carried no telescopic sight, only iron sight's patience, and an intimate knowledge of the terrain he had hunted since childhood. By nightfall, 29 Soviet soldiers would be dead. Not one shot would miss, and the men who mocked his frozen hands would never doubt him again. Before dawn on January 17, 1940, the forest around Kala was unnaturally quiet. Snow muffled every sound, turning footsteps into whispers and rifle bolts into dull clicks. The sun would not rise for hours, for the faint blue glow of the Arctic morning was already creeping between the trees. Simo Häyhä had been awake since 0400 hours. He checked his equipment with slow, deliberate movements. His rifle was a M/28-30 Mosin-Nagant, chambered in 7.62 x 54 mmR. Its metal so cold it burned the skin through gloves. He wiped frost from the iron sights with his thumb, then rubbed snow along the barrel to equalize its temperature. A small detail, but one that reduced barrel mirage in extreme cold. Around him, other Finnish soldiers prepared their own positions along the Kala River line. Many of them stole glances at Simo. They had seen his hands a night before, swollen, cracked, the skin darkening from frostbite. One private had muttered that he should be pulled from sniper duty. Simo said nothing. At 0530, he began moving. He slid forward on his stomach inch by inch, pushing his rifle ahead of him, careful not to disturb the snow's natural shape. He selected a shallow depression near a tree line, roughly 120 yards from a narrow forest trail the Soviets had used repeatedly during the past week. Intelligence reports suggested another probing advance was coming. Small infantry elements sent to test Finnish defenses before a larger push. Simo packed snow tightly in front of his muzzle, forming a crude firing rest. Then he scooped a handful of snow into his mouth and let it sit there, numbing his lips and tongue. If he exhaled too sharply, the vapor could give him away. This was not guesswork. It was routine. Context break. Soviet tactics at Kala. By early 1940, Soviet commanders had learned that large, noisy assaults through the forest were costly. Finnish ski troops and snipers shredded columns before they ever reached the line. In response, the Red Army began sending small infantry patrols, often 10 to 30 men, to probe for weak points. These patrols relied heavily on speed and surprise. They expected Finnish resistance to be thin, scattered, and reactive. What they did not expect was a single man who had already memorized every trail, ridge, and firing lane within miles. At 0615, Simo heard it. The faint crunch of snow, metal brushing fabric, a whispered command in Russian. Through the trees, shapes began to emerge. Soviet infantrymen in dark coats, moving cautiously, rifles slung low. They advanced in a loose line, unaware that they were walking directly into a kill zone Simo had prepared days earlier. He waited. The first soldier stepped into a small clearing. Simo centered the front post of his iron sight on the man's chest. He did not rush the shot. His breathing was slow, controlled, almost meditative. The rifle cracked. The Soviet soldier collapsed instantly. disappearing into the snow without a sound. The patrol froze before confusion could turn into action. Simo shifted the rifle a few inches to the right. Another shot, then another. Each report was sharp and flat in the cold air, each followed by a body dropping where it stood. Within 20 seconds, 4 men were down. The rest scattered, diving behind trees, firing wildly into the forest. Bullets snapped overhead, splintering bark, sending showers of snow into the air. But none of them had seen where the shots came from. Simo had already adjusted. He lowered his head slightly, pressed his cheek harder into the stock, and began working methodically from left to right, targeting movement rather than uniforms. One by one, Soviet helmets appeared from behind trees. One by one they vanished. But what Simo did not yet realize was that this patrol was not alone, and the noise of gunfire was already drawing attention from deeper in the forest. Smoke rolled across the valley as Locke's Sherman barreled through the snow, leaving burning half-tracks behind it like wreckage from a runaway freight train. The Germans had expected a crippled tank, not a charging monster with a broken gun that somehow kept firing. Inside the turret, Lewis coughed violently. "Sarge, this smoke is getting worse. The breech seal's degrading." Locke wiped soot from his face. "Then we fire faster." Ortiz, loading another improvised round, stared at him like he'd lost his mind. "Sarge, you realize that's the opposite of what we should do, right?" Locke grinned. "And yet here we are." New German targets, a defensive line forms. Ahead of them, the Germans scrambled to form a new defense. A PaK-40 anti-tank, gun duggan on the left flank. 8 SD, KFZ, 222 armored car revved forward on the right. And 2 Panzer Grenadier squads leaped from trucks now stuck behind the burning wrecks. The Panzer IV commander screamed, "Zerstört Dyson Verrückten Sherman." Destroy that crazy Sherman. Sims accelerated directly toward him. Lewis shouted, "We're going straight into their kill zone." Locke didn't hesitate. "That's exactly where we want to be." Shot number 3, the armored car. Target, 222 armored car. "Sims, give me 130 meters." Sims swerved right, closing the distance. The German 20mm cannon opened up, shots pinging off the Sherman's glassy plate in bright sparks. Ortiz slammed the next round in. "Sarge, the casing's loose. This thing's gonna lose pressure." Then hit it before it can. Firing. Lewis pulled the trigger. The gun roared again. This time the internal recoil felt uneven, violent. But the shell flew and struck the 222's turret ring. The armored car detonated like a blown gasoline drum, flipping backward. Ortiz hooped. "That's 3. Gun still intact." Lewis glanced at the warped barrel, which now emitted a faint, ominous whistle. "For now," he muttered. Shot number 4, the PaK-40 duel. The PaK-40 crew corrected their aim. PaK-40's ready. Sims shouted. Locke saw the barrel swing toward him. He yelled, "Hard right, 90 meters." Sims yanked the controls. The Sherman slid sideways in the snow. The PaK-40 fired. Flum clanged. The shell slammed into the Sherman's left track guard, denting the armor but not penetrating. Ortiz shouted, "That was too close." Block. "Lewis, take the shot." Lewis swallowed. "No pressure, right?" "None. Just 1,000 screaming Germans watching." Lewis fired. This time the cracked barrel shook so violently that a strip of metal peeled from the muzzle. But the shot flew true. The shell hit the PaK-40's gun shield, ricocheted downward, and plunged straight into the gun's lower carriage, detonating the ammo crate. Boom. The PaK-40 vanished in a spray of shrapnel and shattered wheels. Lewis stared at the cracked cannon tube. "It's not just broken, it's possessed." Locke clapped his shoulder. "And it likes killing PaK guns. Load the next one." The Germans realized the truth. Up on the ridge, a German officer with field glasses turned pale. "Das ist kein kaputtes. Hat es umgebracht." That's not a broken gun. He modified it. A nearby tank commander shook his head in disbelief. No one would fire a gun in that condition. The officer lowered the glasses. He would. Shot number 5. Panzer Grenadiers in the snow. 2 Panzer Grenadier squads rushed forward with Panzerfausts. Sims shouted, "You're going for close kill. 80 meters." Locke didn't flinch. Lewis canister round. Lewis blinked. "We don't have canister." Improvised canister. He pointed at the warp barrel. "It'll shred anything at this range." Ortiz loaded a modified shell with reduced powder and a stuffed projectile cone. Lewis fired. The shell exited the warped muzzle with a sideways spray of debris, transforming into a cloud of lethal fragments. It shredded the leading German squad instantly. Ortiz stared at the barrel. "That wasn't artillery. That was a dragon." Locke replied evenly, "That's 5. Keep loading." A new threat appears, the Panzerjäger. From the tree line, a tracked silhouette emerged. A Jagdpanzer 38T Hetzer, sloped armor, high-velocity 75mm gun, designed to kill Shermans from long range. Lewis felt his stomach drop. "Sarge, that one can tear us in half." Locke smirked, "But it won't." "Why not?" "Because it thinks we can't fire again." Ortiz's eyes widened. "Oh no, you're not thinking, Sarge, you know." Locke gave the order. "Sims, charge the Hetzer." The crew froze. Sims croaked. "Directly the tank destroyer?" Locke nodded. "To kill a hunter. You rush it before it sights you." Escalation, adaptation, and first losses. By 0700 hours, the forest around Simo Häyhä's position was no longer quiet. The initial Soviet patrol had been wiped out in minutes, but its gunfire had done its job. Deeper in the woods, officers shouted orders. Boots pounded through snow. The Red Army was reacting not blindly, but with anger and intent. Simo counted 9 bodies in his immediate field of view. He did not linger on them. Instead, he shifted backward several yards, dragging himself into a secondary position he had prepared earlier. He knew better than to stay where he had already fired multiple shots. Soviet counter-snipers were trained to watch for patterns. Muzzle flashes sound echoes, disturbed snow. He reached the new position just as machine gun fire erupted from the tree line he had abandoned. The bullets tore through empty snow. Simo allowed himself a brief, cold smile. Context break. Counter-snipers in the Winter War. The Soviet army did not lack skilled marksmen. Many had combat experience from earlier conflicts, and by 1940, sniper doctrine was becoming more formalized. When Soviet units suspected a sniper, they often responded with overwhelming fire, saturating likely positions with machine guns and mortars. The weakness of this approach was precision. They assumed the sniper was still there. Simo never was. From his new position, roughly 180 yards away, Simo observed a second Soviet element advancing. This one larger, perhaps 15 to 20 men, moving more deliberately. One soldier carried a light machine gun, its barrel wrapped in cloth to prevent freezing. Another knelt beside an officer who was scanning the trees with binoculars. Simo recognized the danger immediately. An officer with optics meant coordination. If allowed to survive, he would direct fire, call in mortars, and turn the forest into a killing ground. Simo chose him first. The shot was clean. The officer dropped backward, binoculars falling into the snow. Confusion followed, sharp, panic shouting in Russian. The machine gun opened up, spraying the tree line where they thought the shot had come from. Simo waited for the mistake. It came when a Soviet soldier broke cover to drag the officer away. One shot, another body. The machine gun swung wildly, firing too high. The gunner had not seen Simo. He was firing at fear, not a target. Simo shifted again, crawling laterally, changing his angle by mere degrees. From the Soviets' perspective, the shots now came from multiple directions. Within minutes, 6 more men were down. The first finish loss. At 0745, something changed. A sharp crack echoed from the left. Distinct, deliberate. Not the wild firing of frightened infantry, but a single, precise shot. A Finnish soldier manning a nearby position collapsed, blood spreading across the snow near his head. A Soviet sniper. Simo felt a familiar tightening in his chest. The enemy had adapted. This was no longer a one-sided hunt. He scanned slowly, ignoring the chaos, searching for the smallest irregularity. A shadow that didn't belong. A branch bent at the wrong angle. A patch of snow too smooth. Then he saw it, a faint dark line beneath a fallen log. About 200 yards out, the edge of a rifle barrel, Simo adjusted his aim, accounting for distance, cold, and wind, minimal but present. His fingers protested, numb and stiff. The frostbite was getting worse. He could barely feel the trigger. He pressed anyway. The Soviet sniper never fired again. By 08:30, the forest was littered with bodies and abandoned equipment. The Soviets had pulled back temporarily, leaving their dead behind. Simo counted again. 17 confirmed kills. But the morning was far from over. Artillery observers had likely seen the retreat. Commanders would not accept this humiliation quietly. And somewhere behind the trees, heavier weapons were already being prepared. The tactical climax. The first artillery shell landed at 09:02 2 hours. It struck the tree line less than 60 yards from Simo Häyhä's position, throwing snow, ice, and splintered wood into the air. The ground shook, and the concussion punched the breath from his lungs. The Soviets had stopped probing. Now they were trying to erase the forest. Simo pressed himself deeper into the snow as another shell exploded, closer this time. He could hear shrapnel cutting through branches, the sharp metallic hiss passing overhead. The bombardment was not precise. It didn't need to be. Its purpose was simple: force any surviving Finns to move. And movement meant exposure. Context break. Soviet artillery doctrine. The Red Army relied heavily on artillery to compensate for poor visibility and difficult terrain. When infantry stalled, commanders often ordered area bombardments, saturating suspected enemy positions rather than targeting individuals. Against most units, this worked. Against Simo Häyhä, it created a new problem. At 0915, the shelling stopped as abruptly as it had begun. Silence followed, thick, unnatural. Simo knew what that meant. An infantry assault was coming. He shifted again, crawling into a shallow ditch partially filled with snow and frozen leaves. His uniform was soaked now, the cold creeping into his bones. His hands were almost useless, fingers stiff, slow to respond. He flexed them once, painfully, then forced them back onto the right. The first Soviet soldiers appeared through the smoke at 0930. This was no patrol. They advanced in two squads, nearly 30 men spread wide, rifles up, supported by a light machine gun and at least one submachine gunner. They moved cautiously, using bounding movements, covering each other as they closed the distance. Simo let them come closer. At 100 yards, he fired. The machine gunner went down mid-step, the weapon tumbling into the snow. The assault hesitated. Just long enough. Simo fired again. Another man fell. Then another. The Soviets returned fire immediately, bullets ripping through Simo's previous positions. One round passed, so close it shaved bark from 3 inches from his head. He did not flinch. He adjusted his aim and continued. The hands. By now, Simo could no longer feel the trigger. He relied on muscle memory, pressure, resistance, timing. Each shot was a conscious act of will. His mind commanding hands had barely responded. Blood seeped through the cracks in his gloves, freezing almost instantly. And still he did not miss. A Soviet soldier broke formation and rushed forward, submachine gun raised. Simo tracked him smoothly and fired. The man dropped at less than 80 yards. The remaining soldiers faltered. Some tried to retreat. Others went prone and fired wildly into the forest. One attempted to throw a grenade, but Simo shot him before he could pull a pin. The assault collapsed. At 1015, it was over. The survivors withdrew, dragging their wounded, leaving the snowfield littered with bodies. No more shells fell. No more infantry advanced. Simo remained in position for another 30 minutes, scanning, waiting for a trick that never came. When he finally allowed himself to count, the number was unmistakable. 29 confirmed kills, not one missed shot. But the cost was visible now. When Simo tried to stand, his legs shook violently. His hands were swollen, dark, and unresponsive. The cold had finally won its battle. Finnish medics would later say that if he had stayed out there much longer, he might have lost his fingers entirely. Yet that day, the line at Kala held, and the Soviets would remember the forest, where an invisible man had stopped an entire assault. Immediate consequences and aftermath. By 1100 hours, The battlefield around Kala had gone still. Snow drifted gently through the shattered trees, settling over shell craters, abandoned rifles, and dark shapes half buried in white. The Soviet assault had not merely failed. It had broken apart under pressure it could not locate or understand. Finnish runners moved cautiously forward, checking positions, confirming what radio reports already suggested. The line was intact. Simo Häyhä was found exactly where he had last fired, half frozen into the ground, rifle still braced in front of him. When a fellow soldier touched his shoulder, Simo reacted slowly, as if waking from a long sleep. His face was pale, expression unreadable. His hands were worse. The gloves had stiffened into near-solid shapes, frozen with blood and ice. When medics carefully removed them, the skin beneath was swollen and darkened. Advanced frostbite. He could not fully close his fingers. He could barely feel them at all. Yet when asked if his rifle was damaged, Simo only shook his head. "It's fine," he said quietly. Context break. The cost of winter warfare. During the Winter War, cold wounded more soldiers than bullets. Frostbite cases overwhelmed Finnish aid stations. Even among experienced troops, 4 snipers, the risk was magnified. Remaining motionless for hours in sub-zero temperatures while handling exposed metal. Most snipers rotated out after short periods. Simo often refused. By midday, Soviet artillery had shifted elsewhere, focusing on a different sector. Reconnaissance later confirmed what Finnish command suspected. The Red Army had marked the Kala forest as high risk, reporting unusually heavy losses caused by unknown sniper elements. Unofficially, Soviet soldiers had another explanation. They spoke of a Valkoinen Kuolema, the White Death. That nickname had begun circulating weeks earlier, whispered among troops who had seen comrades fall without hearing a shot, without seeing an enemy. After the morning's disaster, the name spread faster. Finnish officers took note. Simo was ordered to rest, an order he ignored until directly confronted by a medical officer. Even then, he argued that the Soviets would return by nightfall. They didn't. For the next 48 hours, the sector remained eerily quiet. Soviet patrols avoided the trails entirely, choosing longer, more difficult routes through deeper forest. Attacks elsewhere along the front continued, but Kala held. Again, that evening, as Simo lay inside a dimly lit dugout, his rifle resting beside him, other soldiers finally spoke openly about what they had seen. No jokes, no doubts, only a quiet, almost uncomfortable respect. The man with the frostbitten hands had done what entire units sometimes could not. He had stopped an attack alone. And though the war would continue for weeks, and Simo would fight many more battles, the events of that frozen morning became legend almost immediately, passed from trench to trench, from patrol to patrol. Not as propaganda, but as warning. The fighting at Kala did not end the Winter War, but it helped define it. In the weeks that followed, Soviet forces continued their advance across multiple sectors, bringing more men, more guns, and more pressure. Yet at Kala, progress remained painfully slow. The Red Army had learned a hard lesson in those forests. Numbers meant little when terrain, weather, and discipline worked against them. Simo Häyhä would return to the line after his hands healed, fighting until March 1940, when a Soviet explosive round struck his face during another engagement. He survived barely, spending years recovering from his wounds. When the war ended, he went home not as a legend seeking fame, but as a quiet man returning to the land he had defended. By conservative estimates, Simo Häyhä was responsible for over 500 confirmed kills, making him the deadliest sniper in recorded history. Yet he never spoke of pride or hatred. When asked years later how he achieved such results, his answer was simple: practice. His legacy is not found in trophies or speeches, but in doctrine. Modern snipers still study the principles he embodied: patience, camouflage, discipline, and respect for the enemy. In Finland, his story is taught not as a tale of brutality, but a survival against impossible odds. Today, the forests of Kala are quiet again. Snow falls as it always has. No shots echo between the trees. But for those who know the history, the silence carries weight. Because once in that frozen place, a man with frostbitten hands stood alone and stopped an army. If this story moved you, do me a favor and hit that like button. It helps keep these stories alive. Leave a comment telling us where you're watching from and whether someone in your family ever served. And if you want more true war stories told with respect and detail, subscribe and turn on notifications.